Believe it or not, you can make this chunky knit blanket with nothing but yarn from the craft store and your arms, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So to start, let's talk about yarn. This is the fan favorite arm knitting yarn. It is called Couture Jazz by a company called Premier Yarns, but it is actually unique in the yarn world. Most yarns look like this, called plied yarns, where it's several strands twisted around with a very visible twisted texture. They're usually very affordable, often machine washable, come in infinite color choices, but can be heavy and difficult to find thick enough to arm knit with. The other common type of yarn is an unplied yarn. This is yarn that is made of a single strand of fiber and can be either a loosely felted or slightly twisted wool or synthetic material. Woven can be easily found thick enough to arm knit with and produces soft and lightweight projects, but it can be expensive to get enough yardage to make a decent sized project, and sometimes they shed and are spot wash or dry clean only. Couture Jazz falls under a unique category of yarn, which is a knitted tube, either filled with a stuffing or unfilled as in the case with Couture Jazz. I'll have a very helpful blog post linked down below about yarn selection for your arm knitting project, as well as links to all the yarns I've showed you here. And today I'm going to be demonstrating with Couture Jazz because it's my personal favorite yarn to arm knit with. To begin, you're going to measure out 3 arm lengths of the yarn you're planning to use. And then you're going to make a slip knot. To do that, you're going to create a little fold in your yarn. Twist it once towards you, reach down and pull up a piece of that tail through the loop. And you'll know it's a slip knot when it can do this. I'll show you that again. Fold your yarn, twist it once towards you, and you see that your yarn's crisscross now. You're going to reach down into that loop you just made and grab the yarn that is behind the crisscross. Pull up the loop and make your slip knot. This also counts as your first stitch. So go ahead and place that slip knot on your wrist, and now I'll demonstrate how to cast on the rest of your stitches. Keep in mind which strand is connected to your yarn ball and which strand is what we will call your tail. What you're going to do is insert your fingers between the strands, making sure the tail is touching your thumb. Then turn your palm up and you'll see that my yarn has created an M, or a W from your perspective. To demonstrate that again, pinch your fingers between your 2 yarn strands with the tail strand on your thumb, turn your palm up, and you should see your little M. With the opposite hand, reach under the first leg of your M, over the second leg, grab the third leg, and pull it through like this. Again, put your fingers between the strands with the tail on your thumb, tilt your palm up to make an M, under the first leg, over the second leg, grab the third leg, pull it through. And you can tighten up as you go. Now for a 25 to 30 inch wide throw blanket, you'll want to cast on between 15 and 20 stitches. I'm going to do 16. Here's what your stitches look like all cast on. You don't have to go too far up your arm. Try to keep it as close to your hand as possible just to make your life easier. And now I'll show you how to knit the first row. Make sure to grab the strand that is connected to your yarn ball. We're going to ignore the tail from now on. While holding onto your working yarn in your hand with all the stitches, you're just going to pull the first stitch off and over your hand with the opposite hand. That loop you created is the first stitch of your next row. Place it on your hand from this direction. And you'll know you went the right direction when you pull on the working yarn. And you can feel the tension on the strand that's on the front of your arm. So not like this, with the tension coming from the back. Tighten it as much as you can, and while holding the working yarn in your stitch-covered hand, pull another loop off and over your hand and place the new loop on your opposite hand. up and over. Place your new loop. Continue like this until you've knit every stitch off of one arm and onto the other arm. And there's your first row done, and you can already see how much length you have from just knitting one row. And that is the speed and fun of arm knitting. For the next row, you're going to do the very same thing. Holding your yarn in the hand with all the stitches on it, with the opposite hand, pull a stitch up and over the working yarn to create a new loop. Then place the new loop on your other arm so that the tension from the ball is going across the front of your wrist. Make sure to tighten up your yarn as much as you can every time you place a new stitch. I mean, not so tight that you can't get the stitches off your arm, but it'll help keep everything neat and even looking for your finished blanket. I wanted to take a minute to give a shout out to Simply Maggie, who made one of the OG viral arm knitting videos. Without her video, I never would have discovered this technique or my passion for yarn, so make sure to check out Simply Maggie's channel, which I'll link down below. When you run out of yarn and need to attach a new ball, just tie a knot as tight as you can, cut the ends short, and keep on working. This is how much length I have with 2 balls of Couture Jazz. You'll need about 8 or 9 balls to make a 40 to 50 inch long throw blanket. And when you have about that 3 arms length left of yarn, it's time to bind off. You want to make sure you have enough yarn to finish the bind off. So to bind off your stitches and finish off your blanket, you're going to first knit a stitch normally, place it on your hand, knit another stitch as normal, place that on your hand, and then pull the first stitch over the second stitch and up and over your hand. And you've bound off one. You can tighten up that stitch a little bit. Knit one more, and bind off the next stitch. Tighten it up a little bit. You want to be careful not to bind off too tightly. As I progress here in the bind off, you can see the little stitches forming, and you'll want to eyeball it to make sure they're all about the same size. So here's an example of a bind-off stitch that's too loose. See how it's bigger than the ones before it? I'm going to tighten it while my baby distracts you. And just continue binding off stitches, tightening or loosening them to keep them even as you go. And then when you get to your very last loop, just pull whatever yarn is left all the way through and cinch that up. So what you'll have left is the yarn tail from the cast on and the bind off. And we're going to weave this end in. Now you can weave it around and around the stitches of your bind off, but this fabric has a tendency to curl in on the edges, and I'm going to take advantage of that to hide my tail. What you're going to do is weave this tail around and around any of the tighter stitches that you find along the edge of your work. You can even turn it around to the back. Just make sure you weave the tail under a few stitches heading down the length of your blanket, then make a little U-turn and head back the way you came. And once you feel like the end is pretty secure, you can go ahead and cut any excess. Kind of stretch out and play with the fabric, and that end should be hidden in there. You'll do the same thing with the tail from your cast on. You can see I'm just kind of weaving it around and around some tighter stitches that I find where I know it'll be held in place. It's not an exact science, and I think I do it different every time. Cut the excess and stretch out your fabric. And that is how you knit a chunky blanket with your arms. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I love this project because the speed is so satisfying. You can hand make a blanket for someone in literally an hour. Check out all the links I have down below. I have some great resources for arm knitting there. And consider subscribing if you're hooked on arm knitting now. I have a million arm knitting projects in mind that I'm going to share on this channel, and you're not going to want to miss it. See you next time. Bye!